Hello, I'm Dynast Amir.
So I reached out to another friend of mine. I said, look, I need to go on vacation somewhere. Where should I go? He said, go to Africa. And not only am I going to go, I'm going to explore a new country. So I went to Tanzania, South Africa, Namibia, Mali, Senegal, Morocco, Liberia, Namibia, Kenya, the Voodoo Festival in Ouida, Gambia, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire. Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria. It's been a beautiful experience, just learning more about our culture, our indigenous culture. So Uhuru means freedom in Swahili. I'm in search of my roots. In finding that, I would experience my Uhuru, which is freedom.
Till next time, Dynast Amir, I'm out.
Peace, family. I hope all is well. I hope today's Tuesday. That's right. Today's Tuesday. I hope your Tuesday is going well. Guys, do me a favor. As you come into the chat room, please hit that like button. Again, please hit that like button. Once again, hit that like button, guys. I really appreciate it. Also, make sure you share this. Make sure you share the content. Also, subscribe as well. Listen, if you have not bought the documentary, In Search of Uhuru, please go and buy the documentary. Again, please go and buy the documentary. Greatly appreciate it, guys. The reviews are coming in, and people love the documentary. I have a very unique story. I don't think anyone has a story unique as mine when it comes to their connection with the continent. So go and buy the documentary. Go and support. Everyone is excited about a Black Little Mermaid, and they want to be included in everything. When you have already a number of Black content creators who are doing the work, I don't need Hollywood or whatever, Disney or Fox Films or whatever to validate me. Again, you have people out here doing the work. So give that same love, the same love you guys are going to give the Black Little Mermaid, because I already hear people saying, listen, we going to bum rush the Black Little Mermaid because these white races are upset that they made the white mermaid black. So we're going to show them and bum rush the Little Mermaid movie. I'm going to take my cousin, my sister, the family next door, the family around the corner. I'm going to take them to see the Black Little Mermaid because representation matters. Well, listen, like I said, you got Black content creators already doing the work, and that same energy you are putting in to Disney, put that into Search for Uhuru, and the brother I'm about to bring on here in about 5 minutes as well. So guys, please, if you have not bought the documentary, go to searchforuhuru.com and purchase the documentary. Also, we have tours coming up. We still have a couple spots left for the in fact, did they fix the site? Hold on one second, guys. Give me a second. There was an issue with the site earlier. Guys, we have tours coming up. Please go to donfo.africa to learn more. Again, please go to donfo.africa to learn more. Just waiting for the video to pull up. Need to contact, I know my web guy said reach out to the hosting company. But if you go to donfo.africa, we have a couple tours coming up. Number one, we're rolling to Sierra Leone, November 20th through December 3rd. November 20th through December 3rd, we are rolling to Sierra Leone. Citizenship is available to those who qualify. Citizenship is available to those who qualify. So make sure you go to Donfo, DANFO.Africa. Please visit Donfo, DANFO.Africa to learn more. And we would love to have you in Sierra Leone. We are also rolling to Senegal in May. We are rolling back to Sierra Leone in April. We are rolling to Nigeria in August. And then we're going to Zanzibar in, what day is that? In November of next year. So we would love to have you all. Again, we would love to have you all on one of our journeys. So again, go to donfo.africa. Go to donfo.africa to learn more. Listen, I'm gonna bring this brother Makonnen, Mr. Sankofa, on with us today. And listen, we're gonna have a conversation in regards to Haile Selassie. Okay, we're gonna have a conversation on that. I know this brother has done a lot of research on Selassie. I kind of got into a little debate with some Rastas not too long ago. And I said, you know what, to be fair, to be balanced, let's bring somebody on who studies Rastafarism, if I'm saying it right, who's involved and who is balanced. Because I told him straight up, I asked the question, okay, Selassie was overthrown in a coup. And then their response was, well, Dynast, we're people just don't know any better, and we're gonna go to Ethiopia and we're gonna change things, and we're gonna, the people of Ethiopia are just lost and they don't know any better about the Rastas and Haile Selassie because he's the king of Judah or whatnot. And I responded straight up. I said, in my honest opinion, Rastas don't have the best brand. Every time I'm in Africa, I see Rastas, I see weed and fat white women. That's what I see every time I'm in Africa. At least with Jehovah Witnesses, I know the Watchtower, they come, they're nice and clean, but it's just with Rastas, it's just wherever I go, I just see weed and fat white women. So with that being the case, how are Ethiopians going to take you serious when you think Rasta, you think weed? So I'm going to bring this brother on. All right. He's going to share with us his book. We're going to ask questions and we're going to judge East Afro dude. I mean, I'm serious. Like every time I go to Africa and I see some Rastas, they high or they chasing white women, and so and that's a terrible stereotype, but I that's all I see when I see some Rastas. So yeah, change Ethiopia. He has no idea. So guys, listen, we're gonna bring the brother on. We're gonna get into the conversation. Then we're gonna open up the lines, and you can call in. So hold on one second. Let me bring him on. Brother Sankofa.
Yes, greetings, Dynasty, or should I say Prince Dynasty? It's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. And I'm always watching your channel. Sometimes I don't always join in the live, but when I get the opportunity, I'm a busy man myself, but when I get the opportunity, I like to listen into a lot of your lives, particularly in the evenings.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you coming on. So let's we'll tell people who you are and what you do, and if you got a copy of your book, let them see your book and all that.
Yeah, so my name's Makonnen Sankofa. This is my book that we're going to be speaking about later on: The Rise of Rastafari, Resistance, Redemption, and Repatriation. We're going to get more into it as the show progresses, but this talks about Rastafari, the movement, and the man himself. And then I've got my second book, Life in Gambia, the Smiling Coast of Africa. Now, I actually met Dynasty when I was in the Gambia, and that's how we got connected. For those who don't know, I worked with a lady called Judith Ryan on the popular Blagsit YouTube channel. I know a lot of people that watch your channel also are familiar with Blagsit. I was one of the foundational members, so I was the video editor, and also I uploaded a lot of the videos, and I filmed the videos as well during the time that I was in the Gambia in 2019. So that's where I connected with Dynast. Dynast came, he stayed with Julia, and then yeah, we got introduced, etc. We spent some days together, so that's how we connected. I also have a platform called the Black Book Show. Now that platform is a virtual book tour that takes place every month. Dynast Amir has been on it. He's got books. He's spoken about his books on the platform a couple of times, and I have authors of African heritage from all over the world that come on the platform and talk about their books. And I've also extended now into a radio show and podcast. So I'm a radio presenter on 2 radio stations, and I also do podcasting where people, can become more aware of books that are written by Black authors. So that's a brief introduction of myself. Yes, I am a Rasta, and I'm not a Rasta who chases white women, and I don't smoke weed. So
okay, see, I didn't know you were actual Rasta though. I never knew you were a Rasta. But okay, so that's why I wanted to bring somebody on. But it's great that you are a Rasta. So can you go into detail in regards to Haile Selassie and his background, his story? Then we'll get into like the Rastafari movement, but let's start off with Selassie. Let's start there. And the reason why I'm asking, because I lived in LA. There's little Ethiopia. I knew Ethiopians, and I never hear them mention Haile Selassie at all. The only people I really hear talk about and are very fond of Selassie are non-Ethiopians who happen to be Rastas. So let's just get into who he is, and then we'll take it from there.
Well, Haile Selassie, he was the emperor of Ethiopia that reigned from 1930 to 1974. So he's got a significance to Ethiopians, and he's got a significance to Rastafarians, and we'll explain both of them. Now, I mean, the question is, Haile Selassie a hero in Ethiopia? That's an interesting one, because I'll talk more about that later. But for those who don't know, I mean, during the time that he reigned, to just put in context with it, you're looking at a time where Ethiopia and Liberia were the only 2 independent nations at the time. Liberia was a previous colony until 1847, so it didn't have a monarchy. So what Ethiopia represented in Haile Selassie, because you looking at Ethiopia, because of the Berlin Conference that happened in 1884 to 1885, the continent was carved up. So what you had played particular countries, colonies, or different colonies. So what Haile Selassie represented in the continent, obviously he was the emperor of Ethiopia, or of the monarchy, but he was also he represented more in terms of Africa as a continent, not just the Rastas, but in terms of Africa. I mean, him and Kwame Nkrumah established the Organization of African Unity in 1963. It's now called the African Union. He was known as the father of African unity, and he was really seen as a figurehead. A lot of times diplomats from parts of the world, for example, when they would come, they would try to seek and speak to Haile Selassie because they saw him as somewhat of a figurehead for Africa. So I mean, his achievements extend beyond just Ethiopia and trying to also really unite Africa. And he was seen, as I said, the father of African unity. A lot of African leaders looked up to him and met with Haile Selassie. In terms of Ethiopia, he really tried to modernize his country. I mean, you're looking at Ethiopia, he drove it from a country which was very much kind of in a primitive stage, medieval-like, and took it into the 20th century. So some of the developments that he did whilst he was there was Ethiopian Airlines, which still exists today. You also have a lot of public schools that were built during the time. He turned actually one of his palaces into a university, and he became the Minister of Education whilst he was actually ruling the country as well. He introduced 2 constitutions to Ethiopia. Also, there's the war that took place between 1935 to 1941, the Italian-Ethiopia War, where the Ethiopians triumphed over Italy. These are just some of the things I mentioned. Again, organizing the Organization of African Unity with Kwame Nkrumah, but also the United Nations Economic Commission as well that he established, which are both headquarters were in Ethiopia. So there's many things he did. I mean, he gave students money to get schooling equipment. Some people paid for their public treatment for hospitals. So he did a lot of great things. Now, I would say it's mixed, and I try as much as I can in this book. I try to balance it because I have come across research and I've spoken to many Ethiopians myself, many people, Rastas I know that have been in Ethiopia, but not just Rastas, Ethiopians that are not necessarily Rastas, I've got research coming from different areas on the continent, and where I'm based at the moment, UK, in different places, different documentaries, different books. So I've got a wide variety of sources that I've come across. So when I read the book, The Rise of Rastafari, and there's a particular chapter in the book which concentrates specifically on Haile Selassie, even though Haile Selassie, yes, he's at the figurehead of the Rasta movement, so you can't talk about Rasta and really not talk about Selassie. But there's one particular chapter I mentioned, and I have to come to grips with that there is a mixed review. So if you say, is Haile Selassie a hero in Ethiopia, the answer I would have to say is yes and no, and it depends on who you speak to. Because as I said, there's many great things that he did, but then on the other hand, there's other things that I've mentioned in the book, for example, where people could say, well, was he so great? But then we have to also put it into context as well, which I try to balance it in the book. So I would say, because if I spoke to, let's just say, 10 Ethiopians, I would probably get a good response of Haile Selassie from maybe 6 or 7, and a few of them would say, well, maybe not. And I've had that kind of view. I've had people that have said, Ethiopians I'm talking about now, that have said, yeah, Haile Selassie was a great leader, and then I've heard Ethiopians say Haile Selassie was a dictator. And I've had that. Even there was a video that I watched, and it was one of Haile Selassie's family members who was exiled into America during the time Mengistu overthrew Haile Selassie.
Not to interrupt you, I'm glad you brought that up. There's a documentary coming out, I think, in regards to Haile Selassie's granddaughter.
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about. Yeah.
Has it came out yet? I want to watch that. Has it came out yet?
No, I don't think it's come out. But what's interesting that I saw that on the video, promotional video, was that when I watched the interview, she said that people that she's spoken to about, what they think about Haile Selassie and like the monarchy, people are either pro or against it. It's like that. And what's interesting as well, in 2019, is that you had the African Union statue of Haile Selassie that was erected in Ethiopia. Now, when that statue was erected, there was a mixture of some Ethiopians wanted to get their statue because Kwame Nkrumah's statue was there, and it was like, hold on, Haile Selassie established the Organization of African Unity with Nkrumah. The headquarters were in Ethiopia, and this is Ethiopia, so it should be, have a statue of Haile Selassie here, recognizing he was the first president of the African Organization of African Unity. But then there were others that disagreed and said that, there's certain things about Haile Selassie's reign that, they didn't like or they didn't approve of. So it's really a mixed, I would say, view of Haile Selassie that you get from Ethiopians. Some love him, and then some not so.
Okay, so let's interject the coup. So he was overthrown in the coup.
Yes.
Why? Like, what happened?
Okay, so people were growing. They were getting, I would say, dissatisfied with his government. So, there was a famine that took place in 1973 and 1974. And obviously 1,000 people died in the famine. But also, people were just thought that the country could develop a lot quicker. So even though Haile Selassie brought in a lot of new developments, they were still saying that they wanted the country to move faster. And I think something that any time when you bring education to a country, or when you develop a country, because Selassie really moved Ethiopia. I said he brought it into the 20th century. It moved it from like a pretty primitive kind of like country. When you are bringing development into the country, ironically, it was the army that rebelled against him, but also the university students, the same people that were getting education, that because of Selassie, the things that he brought into. Because when Selassie introduced, for example, schooling in Ethiopia, a lot of people frowned upon it because the elders, because they saw it as Western, and they didn't really want to bring in these kind of Western things. So he was trying to develop like the universities that he introduced into Ethiopia. So a lot of it, I would say, he was the victim in some cases in terms of the students of his own development. Because once a country has got certain things, they always aspirations. People want more. So I think that's what happened with the students. People were saying it's not developing quick enough. Then he was accused of embezzling money, which wasn't proved to be true. And then his government as well with the peasantry class. They wanted more land rights, and Haile Selassie he tried to get better land rights for the peasantry class. But when it put through Parliament, because he established the Parliament, the people in Parliament didn't want to approve of it. So these were just some of the little things. So basically, overall, it's a combination of things. It wasn't one specific thing. It was a combination of basically dissatisfaction by his leadership, and they felt that it was a new leader needed to come in. Hence why the coup happened by Mengistu.
Would Selassie be considered a dictator?
No, I wouldn't consider him a dictator at all because obviously I'm a Rastafarian, so I'm not gonna do that. I admire him, and like him, but he is to some people in Ethiopia, not to everyone. I wouldn't, but this is what I have to battle with in the book, for example. And there's literally a part of the book actually, but I just want to read actually that I tackle because people do look at him in a different perspective. And there's a part when I actually come to make a conclusion about Haile Selassie. It's the last part of when I talk about the legacy of Haile Selassie. I'm just gonna get this part out. Yeah, it's on the rise of Rastafari, myself, resistance, redemption, and repatriation. I'm just gonna read a part on page 1889. So Emperor Haile Selassie had to deal with many complexities in trying to govern a country with so many different ethnic groups, which had different cultures and languages. Given the diversity of Ethiopia's large population and the long length of time that Haile Selassie ruled the country, it was impossible for him to please everyone throughout the entirety of his reign. Haile Selassie was governing a massive region made up of millions of people that were rarely nations within a nation rather than a unified body of one Ethiopia. Hence the reason why there was resistance to decisions by Haile Selassie's government in Tigray and Eritrea. Regardless of the differences in opinions people have about his legacy or the mystery surrounding his death, Haile Selassie remains one of the most important and controversial figures in Ethiopian history. To some extent, including many Ethiopians, Haile Selassie is remembered as the great emperor of Ethiopia who modernized the country and led Ethiopia to triumph over Italy in the war. To others, Haile Selassie is remembered as the father of African unity who strived for the freedom of all African peoples as well as the unification and economic development of Africa. To Rastas, Haile Selassie is a messiah, and to some others, he is seen as a tyrant. So that basically gives you the mixture of people of different opinions. And what also I want to say as well, I don't think there's any African leader where everyone can say, everyone's going to say this person is a hero. There's always going to be a mixture in views, whether you're talking about Mugabe, Mandela, and Nkrumah, Sankara, any African leader. There's never someone that's going to be, everyone's just going to say, oh, he's all a hero. There's always going to be a divide and a mixture between what people view. And I think the context we have to look at with Ethiopia as well. It's not like, say, England or America, where you have a nation of everyone that speaks the same language, basically a same England, that same culture that runs throughout the country. You're talking about a country that I mentioned in there when I was reading it, that is based on basically nations within nations. Like you see, like Nigeria, for example. Nigeria was put in to basically be Nigeria, but Nigeria is really, it's the Yoruba nation. It's the it's the Yoruba. It is the different tribes basically in Nigeria that are basically put together. If you look at Ethiopia, for example, you've got Amhara, Aruma, you've got different tribes. So when you're looking at that particular nation, you're talking about basically although it's like it's geographically it's the same location, but you're talking about different people of different ethnic tribes existing in the same space, which are not necessarily the same people. Hence why Eritrea wanted to separate from Ethiopia.
All right, so let's speak on the Rasta movement. So how was the Rasta movement developed and why Haile Selassie? I noticed some Rastas worship him, some say we don't worship him. So how did Haile Selassie become the central figure of the Rasta movement?
Okay, so that's interesting. Yeah, exactly what you said. Some Rastas worship him, some don't. I'm one that I don't worship him. I would say idolize him. I see him as he's obviously the key figure of the Rastafari movement, but I don't worship him in God in sense of a supernatural being anyway. So people do perceive him in different ways. Some people, they do worship him literally as God. Some people, they see him as a reincarnation of Jesus. Some people see him as just a great king. So you have different people's perspectives. And also what I want to make people aware as well, you have different groups within Rastafari. So you even outside of that Nyabingi, Boba Shanti 12 tribe, which are the most common, you have different ideologies. So not everyone Rasta thinks the same, because I think this is a big misconception. So say, for example, my idea of Rastafari isn't necessarily the same as someone who's Boba Shanti. Someone who's Boba Shanti isn't the same as Nyabingi. So this is because what I think happens is a lot of times people put Rasta into one bracket where they think every Rasta has to have lots, every Rasta has to smoke ganja, every Rasta has to be a reggae fanatic, or like, so there are different ideologies. I could even go to South Africa today, and there'll be Rastas that I've probably never heard of before, different groups that you know that are over there. So it is vast. There's many different ideologies within Rastafari, even people that are in some of the same groups. Now, I just want to first exactly state what Rastafari is, and then I'm going to talk about Haile Selassie, how he came into it. So again, reading from my book, The Rise of Rastafari, page 14. What is Rastafari? Rastafari is a black nationalist and Pan-African movement that has a spiritual nucleus. The purpose of Rastafari is to uplift black people socially, politically, spiritually, culturally, and economically. Rastafari is about liberating the minds of black people because we are being taught to think bad about ourselves due to the subjugation and brainwashing that has been imposed on us over the last 500 years, which has come from slavery, colonialism, neo-colonialism, and cultural imperialism. A focal point of Rastafari is identity. It's for descendants of enslaved Africans to reclaim our connection with Africa, and to define our own sense of spirituality and culture. Reggae legend and Rastafarian Peter Tosh spoke about the Rastafari perspective of identity in his song African 1977. In the song, Tosh sang the lyrics, "Don't care where you come from, as long as you're a black man, you're an African, no mind your nationality, you have the identity of an African." Rastafarians regard His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie as even an idol, god, or the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. Rastas acknowledge Marcus Garvey, Jamaica national hero, as a prophet or someone who has guided black people towards Ethiopia, Africa, to a black king to help liberate black people from the unjust system of white supremacy, which has been oppressing black people. Now, I could go further on, but I want to speak now more to the question that you've answered. I just wanted to give like a brief taste of what Rastafari is, and because I want to stay now to your point in terms of how it relates to Haile Selassie. So, how it relates to Emperor Haile Selassie, you've got to look at the context of Jamaican history, and this is sometimes what I think sometimes people don't always look at, particularly when I speak to some people in the States about Rastafari, is that you're looking at obviously everyone knows about the transatlantic slave trade. Don't have to explain much about that, but people enslaved Africans. Now, a lot of enslaved Africans were taken, some to United States, but others were taken to the Caribbean. Like obviously, like my ancestors from the Caribbean. So you're looking at enslaved Africans taken from West Africa to the Caribbean. Now, during the process of slavery, obviously we know they've been seized, and so effectively all the African had been mentally and physically being beaten out of them. And going now into colonial years, when Jamaica, even though, for example, once slavery, quote unquote, ended, after that, you're going into the colonial years, the British were still in control of Jamaica. So this is around, you're looking at 1835, 1838, that kind of time, 1834. Now, even though slavery had ended, the minds of the people in Jamaica were still in a colonized mind, and they've been taught, through the colonial years and through slavery, everything African is negative, everything black is bad, and everything white is good, and to look towards Europe and British values and all of these kind of things. So what you have then is an inferiority complex in the minds of people. So, and at that time, you have, this kind of this image of, Jesus, of Christ and God being this white man to look up to. So what you have then is not also a spiritual dimension as well, where inferiority that comes through various layers mentally, but spirituality was one of them. So when Haile Selassie was crowned 1930, bearing in mind that the slave owners were compensated, not the slaves, the slave owners were compensated by the British. I think it was some 20 million pounds, but the the slaves themselves were not compensated anything. So they were basically let free to go on the island. So there was a lot of poverty in Jamaica at the time. So when Haile Selassie was crowned Emperor of 1930, this was still under British colonial period. The significance of that is that, as mentioned earlier at the start of the show, Ethiopia being the only African nation that had never been colonized, and looking at Africa at the time and seeing, for example, a black king, a black emperor. Most people, even to this day, some people don't see an image of a black king, but certainly back then, that was the first time people in Jamaica had seen an image of a black king. So that did a lot to the psyche of the people, because they'd always been taught that, you know, kings are white and this, that, and the other. And also it gave people a memory of their history, to say that, you know, we come from kings and queens, and we had great civilizations, etc. So effectively, Rastafari, it was about connecting people with their African heritage and roots, which have been disconnected from slavery. So when Haile Selassie became emperor of 1930, it was to say, like, the first Rasta, his name is the first Rasta, Leonard Howell, it was to say, almost dash away the king of England. We've got our own king that we should look to, and he's an emperor in Ethiopia, and we should be looking towards going back to Africa, because one of the main pillars and principles of Rastafari is repatriation to Africa. So he was to say that not only should we be reconnected with Africa in our mind, we should be reconnected with Africa also by going back onto the continent. And that's why in Rastafari, you have various things that link into Africa. For example, you know, Ashanti, the Bob Ashanti, which is a Rastafari group, they believe that they're descendants of the Ashanti tribe in Ghana. A lot of the enslaved Africans that were taken from and taken to Jamaica, they were from the Akan tribe in Ghana. So Haile Selassie is the emperor in Ethiopia. You have the Nyabingi group, Rastafari group, and Nyabingi was a movement in Uganda and Rwanda. And there was a queen called Queen Mahomusa, also known as Queen Nyabingi, even at the African drumming. So the Rasta movement effectively is inspired by Africa, about reconnecting to Africa, and that is one of the pillars to make that connection, and not just mentally, but also physically make the move to Africa. So Haile Selassie was important because it was important, because it was a sense of, you know, us seeing divinity within ourselves, instead of looking at people, you know, of another skin color's divinity, instead of seeing, you know, a white Christ, instead of seeing divinity in the eyes of someone else, we are seeing divinity in the eyes of ourselves. And that was the importance of Rastafari, to say that we have a black king, and then we're gonna, you know, worship anyone or look at anything else. We have to look at, you know, this within ourselves. So this is why it was so important when Haile Selassie became emperor of Ethiopia in 1930.
All right, guys, listen, look, link is in the chat room. Everyone, link is in the chat room. Please, if you want to call in and add to the conversation, click on the link. Again, if you want to call in and add to the conversation, click on the link. Link is in the chat room. Also, hit that like button. Again, please hit the like button as well, family. But go ahead and click on the link. But yeah, I'm gonna check out that documentary in regards to the granddaughter. Yeah. I'm gonna definitely check that out. I wonder when it's coming out. It's supposed to come out this month, I think.
Yeah, it'd be interesting documentary. I definitely want to check it out. I mean, I can go further on the importance of Haile Selassie, but I would let you come back first.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think another thing that's really important to bring up as well is that the link between the Garvey movement and Rastafari. So many people are familiar with the works of Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey had the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, with the biggest, you know, race first organization, and, you know, they had different, you know, businesses within that organization, and it was about, you know, empowering people of African heritage throughout the world. And really, a lot of Rastafari is extension, even though Garvey and Selassie did have some differences. Rastafari really was an extension of the Garvey movement, because a lot of the early founders of Rastafari, like Leonard Howell, Joseph Hibbert, Robert Hines Narkley, Archibald Dunkley, they were coming from the Garvey movement. And Garvey was the one that was directing initially black people to look towards Africa. Ethiopia meant the whole of Africa, but to look towards Ethiopia, Africa. So a lot of them were in line, the early Rastas, with the Garvey movement. So there is very much a link between the Rasta movement and Garveyism and the Garvey movement. That's why Garvey is very important to Rastafari as well.
All right, Jay Lion, go ahead, Jay Lion.
I think Ethiopia played a very important role in Africa history. So I think that even like the colors of the flag, like Ghana got some of the colors, because, you know, that's where you know, it kind of kicked off like the Pan-African, you know, movement with Marcus Garvey, and also a church in that was named Abyssinian Church, that's in New York. And also there were African American pilot that trained some of the Ethiopian Air Force. So like and basically he have developed the what do you call it the what do you call it the airline too, and it was like an African American pilot that flew over there that helped them with the war in Italy and stuff like that. So I think that yeah, and so and I think that as far as the Rastafarians and stuff like that, they got the inspiration from Ethiopia. Ethiopia is like one of the first Christian nations, stuff like that. So I think that um yeah, and I think there were a lot of Black Americans that wanted to help, during the war with Italy and stuff like that. But no, they wouldn't let them join and stuff like that. But I think there was just one. It was one pilot that came. So, and I think that yeah. So Ethiopia does have a lot of historical significance in African history. So going back to King Menelik and King Thethros and all that. So yeah. So what I have to say about that.
I think
Thank
if
you.
Dan, I
Appreciate
just
it.
want to add something if it's okay.
And guys, listen, link is in the chat room. If you want to call in and add to the conversation, by all means, click on the link. I see the comments in the chat room, but I'm not gonna read everybody's comments. Like, just click on the link and call in. Yeah. So, guys, the documentary is called "Grandpa Was an Emperor," and I think it's already been released. I just wonder where you could see it at.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something as well, Dinus, because he did talk about briefly, like I mentioned earlier, the Italian and Ethiopian war. Now we talk about it briefly. I talk about it, but I didn't go into it in depth. But just something that I wanted to point out as well, because we're talking about Rastafari and Haile Selassie and certain things that he did as well. And he did give land because the reason why I'm going to mention this because the brother also mentioned what the war, and that there was people from America quite rightfully that wanted to help, and some that did, even though the American government didn't want them to help Ethiopia in the war against the Italians. That Ethiopia, that Haile Selassie, he gave but specifically the Ethiopian World Federation, he gave them land to facilitate the movement of people to repatriate to Africa. At the time, it was sent to the Ethiopian World Federation, particularly because of the role that people in the diaspora, particularly in USA, played in in helping Ethiopia during the war. A lot of Rastas then got involved in the Ethiopian World Federation and then moved to that place that was allocated. That's called Shashamane, and in Ethiopia, it was 500 acres of land that Haile Selassie donated of his own private land. And there's still a community of Rastafarians today. Numbers have gone down. I can't say exactly how many because there's no exact number that's definitely there. But there's still community, and a lot of that's also very important as well. And it's seen kind of as it's a sentimental place because Haile Selassie donated the land, and a lot of Rastafarians have made the move or trip to at least visited, and some have went on to some that are living in Shashamane. So I thought that would just mention that as well. But there are other Rastas, like myself, who don't necessarily say Ethiopia will always have a significance because it's the land that Haile Selassie ruled. And for other things that is like I mentioned, it's the African country that remained independent. But I see the whole of Africa as home. So whether I'm in Ghana, whether I'm in Gambia, whether I'm in Ethiopia, as a Pan-Africanist, I've got I see all Africa really as home. And also because my mom's family are Jamaican. My dad is from Malawi, which is Southeast Africa. So I've got, and like my DNA, a lot of it's scattered from different parts of Africa, like predominantly West Africa. So I see all of Africa really as home.
Mamadou, there's a lot of background noise, Mamadou, but go ahead.
I'm sorry, man. I'm driving. I just wanted to get in the conversation a little bit, even if it's just a minute.
Go ahead.
As far as the Rasta, I mean, me myself, I'm a Muslim, but I have a couple friends in the state. There are Rastas, but like the misconception of the Rasta, like with you like saying like they all have to smoke weed or like chasing white women. Those are like the stray Rasta kind of like just like how you have a good Christian and a bad Christian. When you see like a person that represent a religion well, they're inspiring regardless if you're not part of their religion. And with them, with the weed part being part of their culture, and that's the only negative aspect which a lot of people look at, which kind of make it hard to give them a chance or give them an opportunity to kind of like dive in deep to their religion and all that.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the only thing I really wanted to add. Since I got a lot of
Okay.
noises, I'll call back later on when I'm not driving.
Okay, no problem. Thank you for joining. Guys, links in the chat room. If you'd like to add to the conversation, click on a link. Again, if you'd like to add to the conversation, click on the link.
Can I just come back on this, Dynast?
What'd you say?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment, come back.
Go ahead.
Now. So yeah, one of the reasons, something you tackled on earlier, because you was like, oh, Rasta has got a brand, yeah, and unfortunately, and a big part of this book is to change that and get rid of some of those misconceptions, because as I said, not all Rastas are just smoking ganja and chasing white women, and it's a shame that Rasta is looked at in this way, because I mentioned in my book, Rastafari has contributed so much to the African liberation struggle, and the things that people don't seem to recognize, those people that are that are just smoking ganja, that are chasing white women, those people are not Rastas. They're just basically claiming to be Rastas, and they're ignorant, because even if you mention to them, for example, how did the Rasta movement formulate? Who are the key figures of Rastafari? What are even the principles of Rastafari? They wouldn't be able to tell you anything. So what's happening basically is people have gravitated to certain things, and particularly elements of the culture, like maybe ganja or reggae or whatever, and then claiming that as Rastafari, which isn't Rastafari, but they don't know anything about what Rastafari actually is. So this is why books like The Rise of Rastafari are important. And it's in regards to Rastafari, it's really about getting out the misconceptions, because, as I said before, not all Rastas smoke weed, not all Rastas, have locks. Not all Rastas love reggae. It's broad, for example, and I could even go into how all of those came about. But in terms of Rastafari, particularly, I mean, I was born and grew up in England, yeah, and particularly in the 70s and 80s, even before that, I was born, Rastafari has made significant contributions into the consciousness of black people in this country and the Caribbean, and in jobs of the world. A lot of people wouldn't even have repatriated or made the move to the continent if it wasn't for Rastafari, because it's Rastafari, whether it's through reggae music and it's through the songs. Rastafari, we've always promoted Africa. We've always promoted of being proud of our black skin color, regardless of your complexion. Hairstyle, locks, for example, people used to lock down on locks and say, you got a dirty Rasta, and you got cow shit in your hair and all of these kind of things. And the persecution that Rastafari used to go under. There was a time in Jamaica at one time, the president of Bustamante said, bring all Rastas dead or alive. If the prison can't hold them, throw them in the cemetery. In Dominica, they had a dread law that if someone had locks on, he could be shot on at sight. Even in this country, in Jamaica, in the 70s and 80s, where Rastas were growing up, their own parents used to throw them out the house. So Rastas gone under so much persecution for standing up for people of African heritage. And it's a shame that people have basically perpetuated Rasta in a way where it's in, like the kind of things I don't even want to mention that you mentioned, like weed and old white women, because that's really an infiltration of the movement. Because Rastafari actually is rooted in black consciousness. It's rooted in us freeing the minds out of colonialism. It's rooted in us, building a nation and repatriation towards Africa, following on from teachers of people like Leonard Howe and Marcus Garvey. So it's what you find is there's a lot of misrepresentations of Rastafari, of people that don't actually know the root of it, but have maybe picked up something on the branch or have misrepresented the movement. But Rastafari has done so much in raising the conscious levels of our people, and even people that don't necessarily claim to be Rastas, for example, even in getting to people to looking at like divinity within ourselves, regardless of whatever faith or background you are, whether you're Christian, Muslim, whatever. That concept of us, instead of looking at someone else of another ethnicity, for us realizing that we needed to create our own concept of God based on our own culture and based on our own environment, for example. So these are just some of the things that I've mentioned, right? But Rastafari, in terms of promoting Africa, for example, people used to, in the Caribbean, people used to always, even to this day, what people think of Africa is very negative. But particularly in the Caribbean, when the movement emerged, you couldn't tell a lot of people, you know what, you're African. People used to say, no, tell me not African. African is a jungle. African is this. All that Rasta has done in trying to promote Africa and getting people to look at Africa in a more positive light. And to me, it's almost like a slap in the face when I go to Africa and I see as well what people think of Rastafari. When Rastafari has done so much to uphold Africa. So these people that are just with white women, even when I did a video with Blacks and I did a lecture in school, and someone asked me, someone was like, most Rastas that they see want to go to England or they're with and this, and I'm like, no, these are not Rastas chasing white women in the beach in Gambia and the stuff. These are imposters. These are not people who are Rastafari. And you have a lot of people in Rastafari that basically are imposters that don't know nothing about it, but just claim it because they listen to some Bob Marley song or they want to look a certain way.
Right, and you got a lot of the white rosters too now with the matted.
Yeah, they do.
with the matted locks.
I think this is the thing as well. See, there's no such thing as white Rastas. Yeah, Rastafari came about as a movement for Black people specifically, and the origins of Rastafari. Yeah, it wasn't a movement that came for all people. And I think this is one of the misconceptions and this is one of the problems with Rastafari now, when especially some of the other groups and some other people start to do the mixing thing and it promote as one love. Rastafari came for the liberation specifically of Black people of African heritage, specifically descendants of enslaved Africans. But that's the people that it came for, and it came for that again based on the content. Because a white person, yeah, I think they can support Rastafari, right? And they can, as Black people trying to do for self, but they can't become one of it because their experience is a different experience than the Black experience. It's completely different. So they can't identify with certain things. They can't identify with, what it is to be Black, or having your history or your culture taken away, not seeing the Black king and certain things. So when you find a white Rasta that comes into it, they will gravitate to say maybe the hairstyle, like locks in their hair, or maybe smoking ganja, going to a reggae festival, but they won't understand it from the Black consciousness, from a Pan-African perspective. And I think that's the problem with Rastafari as well, is then it turns into just a culture where you see white people at a reggae festival talking about Jah, Rastafari and One Love, or you have people that just see it from a religious perspective and just see it as a worship of Haile Selassie, but they don't see what it's meant to represent in terms of Black people finding themselves and their identity and looking towards repatriation and looking at divinity within.
Yeah.
Johnny, I'm not gonna read your comment, Johnny. But let's see here. Go ahead, Chrissy. I see you on it. Go ahead, Chrissy.
Yes, hi everyone. And greetings to all on the panel. Greetings, Makonnen Sankofa. I appreciate just everything that you're saying, just giving the background on Rastafarianism. I'm Jamaican. I'm not Rastafari, but I, growing up in the culture, you grow up with an understanding of Rastafarianism and people in the family and etc. You have dreads and you have Rasta, right? So as Makonnen was talking about, the dread is people who smoke ganja, they have locks, but they're not following the sacraments, and they're not following the rules and the protocols of Rastafarianism. Generally, Rastas don't eat meat. Generally, Rastas are very ascetic people. They really try to live an ital lifestyle. Even the whole, the idea of veganism, it really Rastas who really promoted that before it really became very popular. Even with ganja, and some people misuse ganja. Ganja is actually seen as a sacrament in Rastafarianism. It is said that the marijuana leaf grew on the burial grounds of King Solomon. And because of that, they started to see it as a sacrament. Not something really that's supposed to be misused, but people come in and, they misuse all kind of stuff. You have at the root of Rastafarianism, you have, yes, Black consciousness, you have the Black family. Then you started to hear people talking about, oh, it's one love and love for everybody, because they took on the whole narrative, Bob Marley, the one love. But at the root and the core of Rastafarianism is the Black family. I can say, if it wasn't, just speaking from a Jamaica term, from my perspective, if it was not for Rastafarianism, we would be very much more colonial than we are. When you look at Jamaica, you have, if I would parse into like three groups, I would say you have kind of like gully people, like kind of a ghetto-minded people. You have the class of Jamaica is very colonial, very, very colonial. I remember growing up, my mother used to say, I'm British, you know, but I grew up with a father who was very Rasta minded, very black conscious. I would challenge her on this whole British thing. So after a while, she stopped saying she's British. But you have that very colonially rooted and proud of it group of Jamaicans. And then you have that black conscious Jamaicans, the Rastas, and also people who have been influenced by Rasta. If it wasn't for that influence in Jamaica, the level of black consciousness that started to pour out of the country never would have been, and even pour into the rest of the Caribbean. The sense of a black God, right? The first time really saying that God is black, and being able to point to an image of a black God. The sense of going to Africa, proud of your Africanness, proud of your hair, proud of your what your hair can do, proud of your skin color. That really, for the Caribbean, that really came out of that Rasta consciousness, and it spread throughout other islands. So it really is very much rooted. Even the impact that Rasta had on Africa, right? And there was a time Bob Marley music was outlawed. South Africa and Zimbabwe, it was outlawed because it was really kind of like the soundtrack to the resistance in many different countries in Africa. So it really starts with an African core. But unfortunately, things get turned and twisted. I've always heard of that there are Rasta with white women. I've never seen them, but I've heard of it. But I don't know what kind of lifestyle those people live, or if they were challenged, how they would approach it. But, it really has that kind of foundation that I speak of.
Yeah, and I think that with me, I mean, I'm not Rasta. I'm Orthodox. I'm Ethiopian Orthodox, but I would say that with the Rasta movement for Black consciousness, and not all Rastas look at Haile Selassie as the returning things are different, like branches of it. From my understanding, knowing a Rastafarian, I mean, I know some, but and I think it was a book to read about learning about the foundation. I don't know, you might know about this called the Holy Pibby. I think it talks about foundation of the Rastafarians, a book called the Holy Pibby or something like that. I don't know if you heard about that, Sankofa.
Yeah. I know the Holy Baby. I've looked at it.
Yeah. So look at the foundation of it, because like when it comes to things about like just these Black movement, people got to go and read like the source materials, and people just go and just assume certain things, about, oh, well, this stuff about Africa. You actually got to talk to the people and do the research, and people just make a whole bunch of assumptions about there's not just that, but just Africa in general. Right? So, and people just know, and I think that's what people have to, do. And even, even that's my Christian name is Selassie Fakata Selassie. That's my name that was given to me in Ethiopia, and Selassie means Trinity. Yeah? And that's what Selassie means, Trinity. But my Christian name Fakata Selassie means permission of Trinity. But yeah, so, but yeah.
Yeah, well, what's happened is you see that the foundation of Rastafari, as I said before, a lot of people are not rooted in the Black consciousness perspective of Rastafari, and that is a big problem. So people are just seeing it as a culture or just a religion, but they're not necessarily seeing how it connects with Africa. And what happened is obviously how the movement has been infiltrated, just like in the same example of how what a lot of people think of Africa, the way that the white supremacists, the way that the media has portrayed Africa as negative, if everything's bad, and they turn everything around from what's good to bad and what's bad to good. They've done that with Rastafari as well, and they've basically tried to take out. There's various things that have infiltrated the movement to try and take away like the core foundation, the root, and people that are really into the consciousness and drive it into other directions, like the Bob Marley One Love. And by the way, I'm not saying this to diminish Bob Marley as well, because Bob Marley played a massive role in promoting in Rastafari, and he did a lot of great things. I think the media used Bob Marley and he turned it away, because a lot of Bob Marley's songs were revolutionary, and a lot of them were promoting Black Empowerment, for example, like Africa Unite and various different songs that Bob Marley made. But the media pushed this kind of one love imagery of him, let's get together and be all right, and that's then been used with Rastafari, and then people have gravitated to that element of it. But what's basically happening is that Rastafari is becoming further and further away of the the African-centered Pan-Africanism effectively, and to the point where people like Dynast, when he goes to Africa on the continent, he doesn't for example, he says, just people smoking weed and white women. And I think what would be good for Dynast, if you came to say the UK or even Jamaica, you would get essence of more the true Rastas, because what you find in a lot of Africa, depending on certain places you'll go to get, you're just seeing, not that there are them in UK and Jamaica, but you're seeing particularly a lot more of just the people in locks in the tourist areas, with the white women. But if you go to like learn a bit more into it, you'll see more that the original roots of Rastafari and what it truly means.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could add to that, even specifically in Bobo Hill, for the most part, you have large communities of Rastas who are kind of segmented away from most of Jamaican society, because as Makonnen said, there was a Prime Minister Bustamante who was a white man, effectively, right after, the colonialism, quote unquote, ended, who basically said, we want them dead or alive. They call it the Rose Hall Massacre. There was a full massacre of Rastas, and they really in their early years went through a lot just to maintain themselves culturally and religiously, shaving off their locks, imprisoning them, banished from family, removed from their jobs. Even growing up, they would, tell children that, the Black Heart man is the Rasta man, and he's going to wrap you in his locks and take you into the hills. And so you had a lot of Rastas who had no choice but to really separate from Jamaican society, ran into the hills and created communities. And the largest and most notorious one is called Bobo Hill, where you have a large community of Rastas who live there. But as I said, again, if it wasn't for the impact, I don't really think that Rasta really gets its just due in Jamaica, because number one, if it wasn't for Rasta, the way that people understand Jamaican culture, they would not understand it the way it's been kind of branded. And the government really uses that brand, but it doesn't really give respect to the Rasta community for the impact that it has had on Jamaica's ability to kind of have its name on the map. So I think that, going there, you would definitely get a better sense of Rasta. And still today, to an extent, Rasta still get discriminated against. There was a case a few months ago of a young girl having her lock shaven off by police at a police station, and there was a lot of international outrage about that. So, culturally, we're in a battle with there's the African mind, and then there's this English mind, that is kind of, it's a white man and a black man kind of fighting each other consistently throughout the culture. So that's just my perspective from what I see and experience.
Let's pass the Josie. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Josie.
Thank you for having me. I just wanted to say, you guys done a great job about speaking about Haile Selassie and the crucial side, which is the good side of Haile Selassie, but there's also an ugly side to him that should be covered or should be said, so people can know about the truth about Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie, again, he was a man that had thousands of slaves. I mean, thousands of slaves, mostly from the southern regions as well. So he had a lot of slaves from the southern parts of Ethiopia. Someone's mic. So now it's back. So he had a lot of slaves from the southern region who he deemed were not Ethiopian enough. And a lot of Ethiopians can admit to this. There's also the case where he butchered a lot of people. Like he basically militarized a lot of different ethnic groups of the north to take care of a lot of ethnic groups in the south. There was a lot of bad things to him as well. I'm just gonna bring out a source to you guys so you can see what was said here. Again, in Garvey's own words, he said basically he condemned, Haile Selassie for fleeing when Mussolini's troops came in 1935 when Italy invaded Ethiopia. He also criticized Selassie's practice of slavery, which was not abolished in Ethiopia until 1942, and that was in Garvey's own words. So I just had to, point that out to you guys, and if you guys have anything to say to that, then go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I have a question because to my understanding and just from my own research, it was Haile Selassie who abolished slavery in Ethiopia. So this is the first time I'm hearing this narrative of him having slaves. I know that, there are, different factions in Ethiopia and Eritrea who absolutely abhor him. And I know that, there are good things he did, like help to modernize Ethiopia in many ways, look to bring investment, abolish the slavery. And I know that there are things that he did against, the smaller ethnic groups that were, horrendous. But if you could talk more about this whole slavery part, because everything that I've seen, read, I mean, even now as you're speaking, I just kind of did another check. He did abolish slavery in 1923, I believe it was.
Yeah, no problem. So I'll send the link, and there's link in that link. There's also a book that you can read about this as well. It's in the private chat if you want to see it. I'm sending it right now. Yeah. I've just done it right now. So I just had to also point that out. But yeah, as the other brother that was talking earlier, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your name. Makonnen. I'm not even gonna try. But yeah, you made a great point about the Rastafari movement being infiltrated. That was a good point. I did read on upon that as well, and I did a little bit of my own research, and a lot of people did infiltrate that. And you've seen the outcome, basically what it's become today. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you, guys.
Exactly. Let me unmute you, Makonnen. Hold on. Let me unmute you. Go ahead.
Combat first. Yeah, thanks for the contribution. Now, there's two things I want to touch on. One, the slavery element, and then also the Garvey and Selassie relationship. Because that is right. There's I said there's mixed sides to this. And even as something I mentioned is the relationship between Garvey and Selassie. They had differences, but as opposed to like slavery, Haile Selassie was the one who abolished slavery in Ethiopia. Now, there was slavery going on in Ethiopia, but it was more like servitude. As we know, slavery in Africa wasn't necessarily the same. When people think of slavery, they think of like the transatlantic slavery or the Arabic slavery. So it wasn't that; it was more like servitude. So that's why just something that I wanted to state. Now, in terms of the Garvey and Selassie relationship, what he actually said is correct about Garvey. Garvey, I'm actually going to read something in my book now. This needs to be put in context in terms of the war that I mentioned between Italy and Ethiopia, because prior to that war, Marcus Garvey was in praise of Haile Selassie. Yeah, but because Haile Selassie basically he left Ethiopia, he went to seek refuge in Bath and then to appeal to the League of Nations first. That's when Marcus Garvey's views started to change, and he reacted that whether Marcus Garvey, if he was still alive today and he saw Ethiopia triumph over Italy, whether his views would change, we don't know, because obviously he died, Marcus Garvey, before Ethiopia regained the country. But I just want to read a part of my book because it kind of puts that a bit in context as well. So that's on page 42 of my book, The Rise of Rastafari. So this is when I talk about Marcus Garvey now, and then leading into the Rasta movement. So it says, Garvey praised Emperor Haile Selassie when Selassie became Emperor of Ethiopia, and for several years, Garvey's view of Haile Selassie remained positive, but that drastically changed when Haile Selassie went into exile in England during the time of the war between Italy and Ethiopia. Garvey was very critical of Haile Selassie's decision to seek refuge in England. He went as far as calling Haile Selassie a great coward. Garvey disliked that Haile Selassie went to seek help from the League of Nations, which was mainly made up of Western countries. Garvey also critiqued Haile Selassie's leadership, and he denounced Selassie as being the king that black people should not look to. Marcus Garvey died in England whilst the war in Ethiopia was still going on. His opinion of Haile Selassie may have changed had Garvey been alive to see Haile Selassie return to Ethiopia and triumph over Italy. But yeah, as I said, that is something which we will never know. So I just thought I would add that as well.
Okay, Josie, to answer your question, or
Oh yeah. You answered the question. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. It's just there's also like mixed feelings in the comment section about the point that I made as well. So yeah, it was interesting to hear that side of the story. Yeah.
okay. And guys, listen, links in the chat room. Link is in the chat room. If you'd like to call in, please click on the link. Again, if you'd like to call in, please click on the link, family. Again, you're gonna call in, click on the link.
I just want to say, and Makonnen, you're Ethiopian, right?
A lot
No,
of
no,
people
no.
say that I think I'm Ethiopian because the way I look and everything. Now, my mum's family are Jamaican, and then my
Okay.
dad is from Malawi, which is Southeast Africa.
Okay. Right. I would love to hear from like someone from Ethiopia or Eritrea, because as far as like their sentiments about Selassie, because I know that has been like a contention between Rastas and people from certain parts of Ethiopia and Eritrea, as far as the perception that in the Caribbean that we have developed of Haile Selassie and what he represents versus what their experience is. And maybe it depends on who you speak to as well. Because I remember in college, speaking to Ethiopians who didn't have an issue with Haile Selassie. So, I know there are varying differences, maybe depending on ethnic group and the experiences that they've had under his reign as
Chrissy,
emperor. Yes.
by the way, in Ethiopians, yeah, deep sleep is Ethiopian.
Deep sleep. Okay.
Okay, deep sleep. Go ahead and mute yourself, deep sleep.
Can you give me a second? I'll be back. Just give me 2 minutes.
Okay, all right.
And I was just giving a different perspective because I'm Somali, so I was just giving a perspective that, because he also massacred a lot of people from the southern tribes, like of, Gambela, all in the name of his military. But yeah, there's also that side, but you can ask more information from Abby, who knows more about, who's actually from the same tribe, to be fair, so he'd probably know a lot more.
Yeah, Haile Selassie was Amhara. There's different tribes in Ethiopia, so like Amhara, Arima, etc. Now, after they triumphed over the war, the Italians, certainly at that point, when Ethiopia, defeated Italy in the war, he was definitely a hero of Ethiopia. After that time, there was a process where they tried to centralize his government, and this is when I was mentioning earlier, Ethiopia is really a country or place which has got full of different tribes rather than one united body, and different people have ruled over it for different times, not necessarily outside invasion, but different people have ruled over different parts. So after that, his centralization process, which he wanted to basically put the provinces and the regions under his one kind of governance, he did meet some resistance in places like Tigray and Eritrea, etc. Because they didn't see themselves as part of this one Ethiopia,
okay.
hence why, Eritrea independence.
Yo,
Go ahead, deep sleep. Unmute yourself.
oh, okay. Yeah, someone said I'm from the same tribe as him. Yo, Mo, don't say that, man. I'm not from anywhere from that guy's same tribe.
Oh, hold on. Let
No,
him talk.
even
Let him talk.
yo, Dynast, I put a link in the private chat. I think you might see it. It's a Wikipedia link.
Yeah, I see it.
So if you have it there, it will show you. It will show you how. Look, I have no problem with people praising Haile Selassie or going against them. For me personally, look, he was probably the best leader we've had in terms of administrator, but I wouldn't go as far as to call him some pro-black revolutionary or revolutionary by any sense. This guy was deep into the CIA pocket, and this guy was an American accomplice like no other on this planet. I don't know how you guys can look at him and think he was
I don't know. On my end, you're breaking up.
freedom fighter.
Yeah. D sleep. D sleep. You're break. Yeah, I was gonna say that. You're breaking up. D sleep. Like you're going in and out. You there? Okay. Kwame, go ahead.
Yeah, peace, Diners and the panel.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what's the brother name? Makonnen.
Yeah, Makonnen. Go ahead, Makonnen.
Yeah, peace, Makonnen.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I could hear you. I just wanted to ask this brother named Garfield. He wrote a book called Misconceptions, and sorry, I've forgotten the name of the book, but he said that in the book, he says that I've not read it yet. Still, it's part of my collection on my list to read. He said that Ethiopia is not Ethiopia. And he's sort of a Bible scholar, so I don't know if you heard of him, but can you speak on that, or will you rather to read the book if you got it?
Well, what was your question again? Something about, I know Garfield, but what was your question?
In his book, I've not read it yet. It's on my list to read. But he said, in the book, he says Ethiopia is not Ethiopia. He said it's in a different region, according to the Bible, which he's like studied. Ethiopia is not where it is. He said it's in a different place.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that, but I'm not aware of that. But if you put the link of the book in, maybe that's something that I can check out.
I'll put the title. Yeah, I'll put the title in the chat. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, appreciate it, bro. Let's bring Deep Fleet back on. All right, Deep Fleet, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Look, I have to apologize. There's a thunderstorm going on here, so I might be cutting in and out at any point in time.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, all I wanted to say was, look, in that link, you're going to see something called the Gojam Rebellion, where if you're a historian, you would know that when Haile Selassie came back to fight back against the Italian invasion with the British army, he came through Gojam. And these are the same people who were fighting the Italians the whole time. And this guy, these are quote unquote his own tribe, by the way. Different clan, but his own tribe. I mean, different city, state, but his own tribe. And look at what he did to them once he came to power. Because they didn't like the fact that he was an accomplice of the British Empire back once he came back. He pretty much annihilated them, healed them, and then he wiped Ethiopia had in the modern era. But this guy was not pro-black at all, man. He just gave you guys word salad like any leader would, like any of these, even Muslim comes and acts Pan-African once in a while. So let's not act like this guy was anything special. Like, he was a good administrator who liked power. That's it. Just like any other man in power.
You're saying that he was, I'm confused because he fought against the Italians, but you're saying that he was in the pocket of the British? But the British and the Italians weren't at odds. I'm a little confused by that connection.
Look, it's
and if you could explain, if you can expound on how he was in the pockets of the British as well, that would be helpful.
Well, no, well, from my understanding,
I can't.
When I guess when Ethiopia was ruled by Italy for a couple of years, he, I guess, went on exile to Britain. Yeah. Is that what you're referring to, Deep Fleet? Deep Fleet, you there?
Maybe until he comes back. To my understanding, also in that exile, he was trying to gain support of the West in his endeavor. He even went before the United Nations in hopes of gaining support to get the Italians out, but they were not supportive.
Yeah, I think sometimes as well we have to look at it as realize Haile Selassie, what he had to play as a diplomat as well. For example, like when he went, he didn't just flee Ethiopia because he wanted to. He was actually didn't want to, but he was advised to go. And then he just decided to go to the League of Nations when the Italians were fighting against Ethiopia, because he realized that Ethiopia, they would have got battered by the Italians because they were effectively losing the war. They didn't have the weaponry to fight against it. Italians, because the Italians had all that the modern weapon, and the Ethiopians, they had like literally swords and basic things. The main weaponry that they would have got would have been things that they would have captured off the Italians, and the Italians even used mustard gas, which was illegal, banned by the League of Nations. So he seek support. The League of Nations is now known as United Nations. It's for that reason, for diplomatic reasons. If he realized that there's a problem in his country, they can't quite deal with it just Ethiopia, so he went to the League of Nations, and which is meant to protect. It's meant to have collective security, and it was like, hold on, look at this country that is dominating our country. But we are both part of the League of Nations. Italy and Ethiopia are both part of it, and one country is not meant to invade another country that's part of it. However, Italians still decided to do that. So his plea was to get support because there was a breach that went on there. And I think, and also in general with Haile Selassie, because this is sometimes people, there is criticism that, how comes he fled Ethiopia? But I think that's the reason he went to seek support. And had it not been, for getting that diplomatic support and realizing allies, and in wars you always need allies, that it would not have been, because we say Ethiopia did the triumph of Italy in the war, but they needed the support and the help from the British Army to that also helped them to regain control of that country. And had he not had a diplomatic affair with the British in that sense, there may be and certain things also that hadn't sparked that World War II going on, that the Ethiopia may have would have still been taken over. But it also politics in general, because there's something that sometimes people say as well about Haile Selassie. They say that oh yeah, but he was close to the Queen of England and this, that, and the other, or that the Kennedy, the president in USA, and this, that, and the other. And you have to understand, like, sometimes diplomatic affairs, that Haile Selassie was the emperor for a lot of his time in reign. He was the only African monarch. Well, he was the only African monarch, but it was sometimes in his reign, for a lot of it was the only leader of an independent African country. Now, he couldn't necessarily go completely against the powers of the West, because they would have just colonized and dominated his country. So he tried to politically play in a way where he realized he needed allies, or he needed to basically to cooperate in a way with those Western nations to protect his own nation. Otherwise, Ethiopia would have literally been taken over. And when he did go to the Western political affair, to other countries, this is people sometimes criticize. It wasn't like he was just going there and doing nothing. He was going there a lot of times to bring back skilled people to build up Ethiopia, to look at the modernization that was going on in a lot of Western countries, and then to help bring them back to build hospitals, to help build them back to do different things, which he intended for Ethiopians would take over and do those roles afterwards. So he's basically, and it wasn't just like he was cozying up with like the British or the Americans, because in Africa, for example, all of the main leaders of Africa, they had good relationships with him. Haile Selassie was very well traveled. He went to Asia, he went to all over different places, and he met different royalties and different. So it wasn't like he was just close to the British in America. He's known as the father of Africa and of African unity by African people. I mean, the leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah, Idi Amin, and various of the strong Thomas Sankara pro-African leaders they were with. They all had admiration for Haile Selassie. So again, the Organization of African Unity, when it was established in 1963, it was set up in Ethiopia, and they elected him, the African leaders, to be the president of the Organization of African Unity. And I think that speaks volumes within itself.
If I could add, I think it's coming from a Caribbean standpoint, the way that as I said, I know many of the perceptions that we tend to have about Haile Selassie can be very different from the Ethiopian Eritrean story. And I think it's important to hear that side of the story as well. I also think that, when it comes to Haile Selassie and what he represented, or what Ethiopia represented, this is the second time that Ethiopia defeated the Europeans. It was first in 1898 in the Battle of Adwa. They defeated Italy, and then again in 1940 under Haile Selassie. So for many, I think for many Black people around the world, he represented this great resistance. Many times we do not hear stories of African resistance and triumph over the Europeans. So I think that story in and of itself, or that piece of history, is very important. His role in that is very important. I know for the Rastas that, kind of like it's a number of things that brought them to start to see him as a deity. And also the fact that, when he was coronated, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Haile Selassie, Emperor first of the Solomonic dynasty, of 24 years of that dynasty, and all the heads of state around the world came there and bowed at his feet. So there was a lot of symbology that was taking place. And then, this, I guess you could say, a prophecy that they see that, look to Ethiopia for, the redeemer of the Black people. And he represented and he embodied that for many people. Granted, also, there's the other side of the story, right? Outside of the glitz and the glam and the stories of triumph and the stories of defeating in war, there's the side of, okay, well, there's a dark side, so I think it's important to talk about both sides of Haile Selassie bring that to the forefront. But the impact, I would definitely say he has had when it comes to Rasta movement, and then the impact the Rasta movement has had on the global, on the world, I think has been huge for Black people. But I have to go. I will continue to listen. Thank you for the conversation.
No problem. Let me read the super chat. Theo, reminder, May 25th, 2023, Africans in the diaspora throughout the world collectively celebrate Africa Day. Mark your calendars, unity. All right, Deep Sleep, are you there? Are you still in the storm? Are you good, Deep Sleep? Unmute yourself, Deep Sleep.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
We hear you loud and clear. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, when I come here, look, you guys could even say, like G said, I come from, even like half my tribe is from his tribe. But I can look at him objectively and say, look, he was a good administrator for Ethiopia, but he was not pro by any sense of the word. Like, he had good pro-Black speeches, but you could hear, I could find you just as many speeches where he went to Arab countries and had Semitic speeches where he says, "Oh, we're part of the same people. We should come together." Look, that was just him being diplomatic. So this idea that he was pro, like, he's not a Black, like, messiah or anything of that level, that we need to look at him like he has something to teach everyone in the 21st century. He was good for his time. He did what he had to do, and it's time to move on, man. Like, that's all I have to say on him. And look, for everyone who's a Rastafari, at least, read his history for once. The way he came to power, he wasn't even supposed to be king. That's something that I think the brother up there knows. What he did once he became king, the people he had to stab in the back, the tribes that fought for him against the Italians for all those 4 years when he was chilling in England, and when he came back, how he backstabbed them too. How, like, there's a reason why this guy is not liked in his own country that much. Like, you would have to look at it objectively and remove your emotions to even like him as an Ethiopian, let alone look at him like he's some Black leader that needs to be praised long after he's dead, like he was anything special. And on top of that, he was pro-West. Like, I don't know how you can be anti-West and praise Haile Selassie when he was the most pro-West African leader at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've heard a mixed bag by a lot of Habasha people, and I think that a lot they did, like you said, he did do administrative, modernized Ethiopia, but also the criticism that he also opened, Africa, Ethiopia to the West. So I know, so also, and like any other African leader, they're going to have a dark side to him or something. Like they'll have, like, he did good things and stuff like that. I'm not Rasta, but I would say, but I think then deifying people and all that type of stuff becomes problematic and stuff. And I think that yeah, like you said, and I think that I agree with some of the things you say, and I think that as far as sometimes we have to be careful putting people on a pedestal too much, and I think that respect that the things that he did do, and yeah, and I think as far as just focusing on Haile Selassie, or just the Rasta movement in general, as far as Black consciousness, we should respect that in itself, and I think that just it has done like a big impact and stuff like that. So I think that's what we should be concentrating on. He was a man, like and any other person that but makes mistakes, and like other African leaders and stuff in the past and stuff like that. So yeah, so that's how we should be looking at this, in my opinion.
Yeah, I actually agree with everything that's been said from both sides of both sides of the viewpoint, actually, from Deep Sleep and from the other brother whose name I won't try to pronounce. It's interesting take, because he also had good and he also had bad. The good is he progressed Ethiopia, thoroughly trying to push it into the future. But there's also a very, very sinister dark side about him that people should look into as well. Before you make a judgment, you're supposed to know all sides of the story before you come to a conclusion. I think he was a very strategical military leader. He knew what to do when it came to combat. Props where props are due. but then also there's also the fact that he vividly cared about his own well-being, and that's the reason why he went to escaped Ethiopia when the Italian onslaught got too heavy. Um, I'm not gonna say by myself that he was a bad guy because it's also good to him, but I would say I'm somewhere in the middle, not really convinced where to go due to because I've done some research on him, but I would still need to do a lot more for me to make my final stand on where I stand with Haile Selassie. But I would say I'm somewhere in the middle with him.
Hold on, let me say, Kofa, let me unmute you. There was some feedback. All right, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to go to what you touched again. What I was saying, that the topic of it, is Haile Selassie considered a hero in Ethiopia, and I guess from what we've heard, and something that I stated already, again, it's a mixture view. It's yes and a no, depending on who you speak to. Some people, and then many Ethiopians I speak to are like yes, and then others no. So I said you've got the good side and the bad side. So I think it's again driving us into that area that it's mixed views of Haile Selassie, as I mentioned at the start, and even outside of Ethiopia, it could be even just people that you speak to in general. There's mixtures. But what I want to touch on to now is from the Rastafari perspective, and particularly from when Haile Selassie was crowned emperor in 1930, because I mean, and like one of the ladies that was on the platform, the lady that was on the platform earlier was saying again something as well, which is important, the symbolicness of it, because when Haile Selassie was crowned in 1930, most people say in Jamaica. And the reason why I say Jamaica, because that's where, even though Haile Selassie was emperor of Ethiopia and crowned in Ethiopia, that's where the movement really emerged in Jamaica. The people, that started the movement, the early followers of Rastafari, they didn't know anything about Selassie. Obviously, a lot of these things that have been mentioned about Selassie happened later on, like the war against Italy, like the other things that's been mentioned. But when it was, the symbolicness again was just that this black king is crowned in Ethiopia at that time where they've never seen a black king before. It was always told the white king and the white King George, or the British values, and they basically been whitewashed of their own history and culture. And I think that's something that not that's been overlooked, but something symbolic that we also have to look at, and the importance of seeing divinity within ourselves. Now, regardless of what your views of Haile Selassie, whether pro Selassie or anti Selassie, I think we have to recognize that the brother said just before, the contribution that the Rastafari as a movement has made in black consciousness. And it's not to say even if you all have to praise Selassie, etc. But in terms of realizing the role and the concept of black people, looking at divinity within ourselves and being proud of being African is very important. And also, I think the Ethiopian, not this perspective, but there's always going to be that difference as well, because the way that Rastas in Jamaica view him, or Rastas in the Western world versus people in Ethiopia, there is going to be a difference, because he was an emperor in that country, and what people in the diaspora had gone under from the last 400 years of slavery and then colonialism. That's why Selassie was so symbolic, but it's not as symbolic for someone in Ethiopia who's who's seen emperors constantly throughout their time, from one emperor to the other emperor, who's had that history that hasn't been taken away from them, etc. So it was more symbolic to people, in descendants of enslaved Africans in the diaspora, particularly Jamaica and other parts, because of that reason, and because of the disconnection with Africa, because we were taken for Africa, we didn't know where we were. So it was just basically something to look towards, to give the black people hope at a time where it was under serious oppression from white people.
Listen, guys, links in the chat room. People keep asking for the link, but then when I put the link in the chat room, you guys don't click on it. So links in the chat room. If no one else was to join, we'll go ahead and start closing out. But let's do this first. Makonnen, where can people buy your book at?
Okay, the Rise of Rastafari: Resistance, Redemption, and Repatriation. It can be purchased on Amazon, and that's going to be the best place to get it from. It's in paperback and Kindle. And just something that I want to say before we close out as well. This is
take your time. Take your time.
Okay, you don't have to be a Rastafarian to read this book. Yeah, so this book is for everyone. Effectively, it's a Black history book. Now, even though the theme of the book is in Rastafari, and many of the elements are about Rastafari, And I said it's the man in the movement. A lot of it concentrates more on the movement. There's a chapter in the book that I talk about Haile Selassie, and obviously I do talk about Haile Selassie because he's the focal point of the movement, but it concentrates a lot of it is on the movement. But what I think anyone will learn, and the reason why I say it's an African history book, because there's parts of it that will talk about, say, the Rasta movement in UK. That's one chapter. How the significance of, Rastafari, particularly in the 70s and 80s, when there was a lot of racism going on at the time in England. Some people are not aware of that, and what Rasta did in trying to like bond communities and promote Black Power at a time where there was a lot of racial oppression. We talk about the Caribbean. We talk about how it emerged in the Caribbean, a little bit about I've talked about earlier, but and then even like, say for example, one of the parts where we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, I go on to talk about the Maroons. We talked about mixture. People have a mixture of views about the Maroons and what happened and in Jamaica, colonial Jamaica, the context of the environment of how the Rastafarian movement emerged. Even stuff that we haven't mentioned, for example, like Pinnacle. Leonard Howell is the known as the founding father of the Rastafarian movement. Now, he established something called Pinnacle in 1941 and until 1958, and that was the most self-sufficient, economically empowered community in the island of Jamaica. And they had skilled craftsmen. Some of them, they grew ganja and they sold it, but there was a lot of skilled people that worked there, and it was a prospering community to the point where they banked their own money in Pinnacle. It was a economically dependent, self-sufficient community in Jamaica, and they used to the people that worked there used to sell stuff to like the local markets. And the colonial government in Jamaica didn't like it, and basically there were several raids on Pinnacle. And eventually, the government and the police under the government basically, all of the burnt the houses down, and all of the people had to disperse. But sometimes when again, talking about the contributions of Rastafari, Pinnacle is not something that people look at. And Pinnacle is a prime example of one of the pillars of Rastafari, which is nation building, of Black people building a nation. And I think that model of Pinnacle is something that a lot of us can a lot of us don't know, but we can also look at as well. And more about Pinnacle is obviously in the book, The Rise of Rastafari. So go get it. But there's various things that talk about that relate to history. The persecution against Rastafari, I mentioned some of it earlier, but people don't know how heavily Rastafari have been persecuted in Jamaica, but also other islands like Dominica, in the UK. So that's mentioned in the book. Garvey, like a lot of people, Marcus Garvey and Selassie did have, there was some differences, but it's Rastafari. If it wasn't for Rastafari, the legacy of Garvey, particularly in the UK, a lot of and the Caribbean, a lot of people wouldn't even have known about the name Marcus Garvey if it wasn't for Rastafari, because Rastafari have, constantly spoke about Marcus Garvey. Many Rastas see him as a prophet. So Rastafari has really, put in Jamaica, put Emancipation Day back on the calendar, put Marcus Garvey. A lot of people have even read my book say that, I didn't know much about Marcus Garvey until I read your book. I remember when I went to, long time ago, when I was a little child, when I went to this shop, as a Rastafari shop, and I saw this man a picture up on the wall. At that time, I didn't see no Black people in pictures in this restaurant. And I said, who that picture? And I remember it's like Marcus Garvey. It's a Rastaman shop. And I remember going home afterwards and saying, who's Marcus Garvey? And then finding out about him. But I think there's so many ways that Rastafari has contributed. But as I said, there's different things that I mentioned in the book. So it talks about, the Garvey movement and the UNA, the influence between reggae and Rastafari. So, we've talked about Bob Marley, but you also have, Dennis Brown, Burning Spear. A lot of in the 70s are very popular reggae artists that helped to propagate Rastafari and take it globally. And that's a lot of people, the first introduction they get to Rastafari is through the music, through the reggae music. So reggae has played a key role. And a lot of people like reggae music that still look down against Rastafari, ironically. But reggae and Rasta, I talk about the influence of reggae and Rastafari. Roots reggae music was birthed out of Rastafari. And various other things like Rastafari days of celebration, so days that are important, like His Majesty's coronation, Leonard Howell's birthday, Ground Nation Day when Haile Selassie visited Jamaica. So there's a lot of content that in here that touches Ethiopian, Jamaican, UK history, talks about a lot of different topics. So even if whether you're Rasta or not, you will still benefit from a lot of the information that is in here. And I think that's important. This book is not about converting people to Rastafari. It's just to furthering, getting information and knowledge. And sometimes, even if we don't always agree or don't agree with someone's ideology, we still need to take on that information to enhance ourselves.
Hey, I appreciate. How can people reach you, Makonnen? How can people reach you if they want to reach out to you,
Yeah,
contact you?
the best way to reach me is going to be on Facebook, Makonnen Sankofa. So as my name is spelled there, yeah, you can just hit me on Facebook, Makonnen Sankofa, and or Instagram if you want to get me on Instagram at Makonnen Sankofa. Those are the best two ways to reach me.
All right, perfect. Hey, everyone, thank you so much for joining. Like, share, subscribe. Until next time, family. Dynasty Mirror Search for Uhuru. Peace.
Okay, thanks for having me.